This week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and I'm joined again by my co-host Scott Cutler, who's the Executive Vice President with the NYSE Euronext. Welcome, Scott, and Happy New Year.
Yes, it's great to look forward.
Well, we had the benefit of having our show looking back during our holiday show, and as tradition has it, this is our show to look forward and predicting the trends for 2013. So we want to make sure that we pass this forward-looking knowledge along as well.
Well, why don't I be a gracious co-host since I went first looking back? Why don't you look first looking forward?
That would be wonderful. I am actually prepared to do that. So the first topic that I want to talk about is a little extension of last year. Last year we said was the year of shareholder communications. Actually, I'll talk about what we designate this year because it's not shareholder communications again. But you could define this year as shareholder communications on steroids, okay? Because not only will you have all of the need, like we discussed last week, of communicating year-round, but now we're seeing some pressure being put on by shareholders to actually meet with directors, okay, and particularly chairs of committees, and particularly chair of the compensation committee, okay? That seems to be the primary focus, although obviously we know that once that starts, there is an urge to also meet with the other committee chairs if the opportunity presents itself. And we had a little bit of inkling. There was something that was bannered around a year ago called the Fifth Analyst Call, which was meant to try and have a meeting like that. And that sort of died on the vine. It didn't get any real mileage. But we're starting to see a push, again, coming out of 2009, 2010, and all of the problems that happened corporately. We're starting to see that rear its head again. And if I had to make a prediction in this, I think that you're going to see a couple companies that open the door to this process, that have skillful enough comp chairs and processes that they're going to actually entertain the idea of having their head of the comp committee address shareholders in some fashion that fits FD and all the legal things. And the important part about that is if that sort of becomes an accepted practice at some respected companies, I think all public companies are going to start to feel the pressure of the need of doing that. And the impact of that is all of a sudden your skill set changes for who's your chairs, the process of preparing for those, legal, finance, getting everybody together to make sure that the message is the right message. I mean, it's going to be another distraction in companies, but one that, if I had to guess, I think certain companies are going to be faced with that this year.
Interesting. So as I look forward, it's partly a reflection of what we saw happen over the last year, but my key point for board for 2013 would be risk management in an interconnected world. And if we learn anything from the last year, we learn of huge exposures that we have. We look at supply chain risk, where a flood, a tsunami in Japan or in Asia, or a hurricane in New York can disrupt supply chains. Companies are dramatically changing the way they look at where they get goods and supplies. Business continuity planning, especially coming out of all of the world crises and disasters that we've had, is certainly something that's changing the way people are organizing everything from technology infrastructure to employees to workforce management. I think it's a big trend for next year. I think in this area of interconnectedness, I think it's also a realization that very few companies operate in an independent fashion, either independent on supply chain or customers or direct access, and that creates unique problems both globally and regionally. And I think the last part that I would communicate more around risk management is that clearly with technology being a much more important part and quite frankly embedded into nearly every type of company, either from the communication side or the technology infrastructure that requires, that companies at scale require. There's a whole host of risk management issues associated with IT that are new to many companies in the boardroom. You had massive security breaches last year at global financial institutions, consumer-facing institutions. You had technology failures at lots of different companies in interesting industries. And so I think that's going to be probably another important thing to factor into it. So I don't want to sound all gloomy, but I just think these things have raised up to the level where the boards are going to be forced to address those from a strategy point of view.
Well, IT risk going forward certainly has to be considered piling on. I mean, it is so unknown, okay? The hackers are just getting, comfortable with, how to attack places. And if there's any message I think that we can deliver to our audience in this, meaning the board of directors, is you have to make sure that these processes are starting down in the business units, okay? They're the first ones that can recognize these, because as a director, you just can't get on top of all the issues. So you better make sure that the processes are in place so that this can be managed.
What's your number two?
Well, this is one that I don't think you're going to have any argument with, and this is the one that I'm going to coin as the year of. Okay, last year was Shareholder Communications. This year, it's the year of corporate strategy. And let me tell you why, and I'll be interested in hearing your comments on this too. Again, going back to the financial debacle and, that we're still working our way out of, you look at companies, they've got some cash hoards sitting there. You've got the consumers starting to come back into the purchasing. We have to see what happens with the fiscal cliff and that kind of thing. But assuming that gets worked out, I think it is just going to be such an important time for the boards and the managements to have their act in place on going through corporate strategy. And again, as we've said which was a great segue, a major part of that is the risk reward of the businesses that you're going to be in. That process has to start down in management. To me, it's not the board's job. They should sign off on the corporate strategy and make sure the direction is prudent and the risk is prudent, but the job is really that of management's job. So
I agree with you. It's interesting that last year we saw a record number of spin-outs and carve-outs, companies really trying to maximize shareholder value. While we didn't see a lot of M&A activity, you've seen a lot more strategic acquisitions and strategic thought to be able to put your company in a place to be able to capture the growth opportunities around the world. And so I think in the real-time environment that we live in, corporate strategy has got to be right at the top.
This is going to be a year where corporate secretaries and chairmen of the boards have to look at their meeting agendas and say, okay, how can I get the have to do's out of the way as quickly as possible, whether that's compliance or whatever you have to do, so that I can get to the meat of what the board is really on the board to do. Okay, right. And that is to lend their expertise in the corporate strategy area and provide opportunities to grow the bottom line, because this is the year. This has to be the year of growing that bottom line.
So my second one for 2013 is the talent gap. Now, we talk so much about labor shortages around the world, but you don't hear a lot of people talking about the reality, which is the talent gap. getting and keeping top employees is a challenge. And particularly in light of the changes in the environment, the changes in the skills needed for companies to be successful, there is a shortage of employees, particularly in certain industries, that make it a big challenge to grow. You take the technology industry, for example, with the amount of engineers that come into the United States. They don't come away with a green card. They've got to go back. A technology company can't hire enough engineers. You've got, again, like we talked about before, some of the new things that are changing in the environment requiring employees to have a different kind of skill set. And so I think with that you deal with how is it that you create an atmosphere and a culture to attract and retain key talent. How do you create an environment to keep the right people in their seats? And in an area where quite frankly, the market challenges have been so significant, the amount of drain because people have more responsibility, operate in a 24/7 environment, sort of the drain on individuals over the last few years is quite significant as well. So focus on HR and culture is really important. And I think from a policy perspective, I think there are a lot of things that we may actually tackle this year, such as immigration reform, to enable companies to be able to attract and find the right type of people from anywhere around the world. And in a globally connected environment, finding employees and people from regions around the world is also a big key challenge. So we have companies I know of that are setting up education centers and training centers in places where they know they need to be 10 years from now, and finding and developing their talent on their own. So I think that talent gap is a big issue.
Well, as it relates to our boards, we can start with CEO succession, which is preached about, day in and day out about those responsibilities. But a board also has the ability to take a step back, sort of take a look on our how are we rewarding employees? Are we rewarding them for the right reasons? Is their evaluations gearing it to where, to the right areas to evaluate the best performers? Are we rewarding the best performers? Because I don't know of a great company that hasn't started with great employees. So
Right.
your point's very well taken.
Yeah. Your last point?
Well, my last point is just going to be that it's an overwhelming responsibility as a director sitting on a public company board. I don't think you can. I don't think you'll ever get your arm around everything that you are really responsible to do. So in approaching that, I think you have to take the best, most organized position as possible on what you can contribute, and then make sure that there's processes for things that you can't stay on top of on a daily basis. And I know we both have a very selfish interest that boards do very well this year. It makes a difference not only to the economy, but certainly to your business, and we're in the business of, corporate board members in the business of helping boards. So let's hope, Scott, that this is the start of something that's going to be a better year than last year, and certainly better than 2 years ago, and that we are going to have much more positive things to report as the weeks go by.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have some answers by the time this airs as to what's going to happen with the economy.
Well,
right?
starting with the fiscal, that's right. So, Scott, thanks again. We'll look forward to looking and having another great year. And that will conclude our look forward. And again, I hope you noticed that we're looking over Times Square here. This is, again, part of the creativity of making this show more interesting. I hope you recognize that as a viewer. And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. And again, we'll be back next week to take a look at another topic that'll help you be a better board member and committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext. along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.